Welcome, and thank you for joining our Path Forward discussion today. My name is Kendall Rawls, and I am the Director of Development for the Rawls Group and your host for today's panel. We have received many great questions, so we are going to dive in fast to ensure we get to them all. Before we begin, I would like to introduce you to our panelists. First, we have Dan Schneider. Dan helps family businesses and privately held companies design, build, and activate personal and organizational cultures that impact lives and perpetuate legacies. His CXO experience in manufacturing, technology, financial, and advertising firms provides a rich background for coaching and mentoring others as they accomplish their personal and professional objectives. George Taylor. George is a partner with Burr Forman in the firm's corporate and tax practice group, focusing on the financing and acquisition of business entities, with an emphasis in the healthcare, manufacturing, and automotive sectors. Matthew Scully. Matthew is a partner with Burr Forman. Matthew's practice is focused in the area of labor and employment law. His practice is proactive, focused on managing the complex economic, legal, and business decisions employers must make in effectively managing their workforce. Next, we have Renee Winston. Renee is the president of People Management Solutions, an HR consulting firm. He previously was a partner with Owl Consulting. He has worked at senior level positions from director to vice president at Popeyes Louisiana Kitchen, Penske Automotive, RML Automotive, the Home Depot at the Home Services, and CarMax. He has consulted with diverse organizations from automotive groups, restaurant groups, construction companies, to advertising agencies. Next is Brigitte Hufele. Brigitte is the CEO of the NLP Center of Atlanta. Brigitte is known to be the most fast-tracked female trainer and former lead coach of the biggest self-development company in the world. She has been invited to lead from stage in the art of listening and communicating based on the methodology of neuro-linguistic programming, also known as NLP. Brigitte shares success patterns, insights, and strategies for a successful life. Her expertise in communication and education methodologies and her tireless ability to implement new and proven strategies makes her the caring leader and mentor that she is to so many people, regionally and globally. Tim Oberst is a partner with Bennett Thrasher's pass-through entity practice and is responsible for coordinating income tax engagements for closely held corporations, partnerships, not-for-profit organizations, and individuals. He has significant experience in corporate, partnership, individual estate, gift, and trust taxation, serving public charities and private foundations and tax research. Thank you to all of you who submitted your questions. We have a diversity of industries represented on the call today, such as manufacturing, multi-unit franchising, professional services, retail automotive, etc. Some of the questions we received are specific to an industry. However, most of the information overlaps industries, and I'm grateful and excited that we can learn and take from each other. The key to that is to remain open and present. Also, please note our environment is changing very quickly, and laws are different state to state. Please reach out to your advisors for specific tax and legal questions. We are planning to host another conversation in the next couple of weeks, given how quickly the environment is changing. If you have additional questions as a result of this conversation, please feel free to email them to me at kendall@rawlsgroup.com or submit them via the Ask an Expert form on the Rawls Group website at www.rawlsgroup.com. We will make sure to connect you to the right person, or you can email the experts directly. Here we go. So the first question we're going to direct to Tim. Regarding rebates being sent to individuals, will any taxpayers be required to pay back any portion of these funds when they file their 2020 tax returns?
Thanks, Kendall. So taxpayers will be receiving payments of up to $1,200 for individual or $2,400 for married, and also an additional $500 per child under 17 years. And these will be based, there are income sort of thresholds in which these payments will be phased out. And those begin at $75,000 of income for individuals and $150,000 for for filing married filing jointly. And then, so there's a phase out of the amounts you receive. Now, this is based on income as reported as adjusted gross income on your tax return. So these payments will be based on the individual's AGI on either the 2018 return or the 2019 return if that's been filed. So it'll be based on the most recent return. And, this is called an advance rebate because technically it's a credit for the 2020 tax return. So the rebate you receive will have to be reconciled on your 2020 tax return. However, and the favorable aspect of the law is that if you receive a rebate amount based on either your 2018 or 2019 income, but if you would qualify for a higher amount based on your 2020 income, then you receive that additional amount through filing your 2020 tax return. Also, potentially, you might not qualify at all for these payments based on your 18 or 19 return, but if you do qualify, then you'll get that credit. Credit will be claimed on your 2020 return. However, on the flip side, if you qualify for a lesser amount of the credit when you file your 2020 return, you will not have to pay back that excess. The law is saying that the rebate cannot be reduced below sort of zero of what you received. So that's a favorable aspect. So the answer is no, you will not have to pay back any portion of the amount that the rebate you do receive now. But on the positive side, you may actually qualify for a higher amount. And also, you will not get a rebate now if you don't qualify. For example, if you're dependent, but perhaps if you're not a dependent in 2020 tax year, then you'll receive a credit.
Great, thanks. Here's another one for you, Tim. I heard that the CARES Act has a provision allowing employers to defer payment of their payroll taxes. Does this apply only to certain businesses, and are there any specific requirements?
Okay, thanks. So this was one of the provisions in the CARES Act that was designed to give, immediate cash flow relief to businesses. And this particular one was designed, there's not a requirement to be, particular requirement to be impacted, by the coronavirus pandemic. All employers can benefit from this provision. And this will apply to the wages paid to employees from the date of enactment, which was last Friday, through the end of this year. And technically, what employers will be able to defer is the 6.2% employee share of Social Security. And so those amounts will be deferred through the end of this year, and the amounts will be due, 50% of the amount that was deferred will be due at the end of 2021, end of next year, and the other 50% will be due, the remaining 50% will be due at the end of 2022. Now, the payroll companies will not be, it's my understanding that the payroll companies will not be automatically sort of deferring these payments for you. You're going to have to opt in. They're going to be sending some sort of notification or something that you'll have to elect to opt in, because there is one caveat, even though there's no specific requirement to benefit from this deferral, but there is one provision in the CARES Act whereby if you apply for this new SBA loan program, which is a very favorable program. It's called the Paycheck Protection Program. If you apply for that and have your loan forgiven, then you do not qualify for this deferral of the payroll taxes. So that's the one caveat, and that's why the payroll companies will have to, send instructions to all their clients that you sort of have to. They can't automatically start deferring for you. You have to make some sort of positive affirmation that you want to start deferring these payroll taxes.
Okay, thanks. George, is it necessary for business to have furloughed employees to qualify for the new SBA loan program in the CARES Act? Or is there any other bright line test for being impacted by the coronavirus?
Sure. Kendall, first of all, thanks for having us on. And second, are we not doing video for this call?
We are.
Okay. Well, let me respond a couple of ways. You don't have to have furloughed employees at all. What you do have to do, though, in the process of applying for the PPP program is you have to bring back all the employees that you furloughed, if you furloughed any or laid off any. You've got a requirement that you measure by the February 15th date, and you have to bring them back all in full-time positions by June 30th. So you have to really restore your workforce to the position it was in before all of this financial business started. So in terms of a bright line test, the PPP program is really, really simple. There are two requirements. One is you have to be in business on February 15th and paying employee wages. And the second is you have to have fewer than 500 employees. You have to be a small business. And that's the general definition of a small business is based on your number of employees. So the current Treasury guidelines that have been actually issued only yesterday say that the loans are going to be repaid over 2 years. There'll be no payments at all required during the first 6 months. The likely interest rate is going to be 0.5%, which is a really advantageous program for all our business clients. A couple of other questions I'll answer, though, kind of in the course of responding to this question. How can you use the money? You can use the loan money for any of 4 categories: payroll, interest, utilities, and rent. The idea is that most of this money will be used for payroll. Your loan can be an amount, it cannot exceed $10 million, but it also cannot exceed 2.5 times your average payroll, for, monthly payroll for the last 12-month period. And then I guess in kind of closing on this, I have 2 other points. First of all, these are going to be the simplest loans any bank has ever made. There's no collateral for these loans. There's no personal guarantees. There really doesn't even need to be a credit check. So banks should have an easy time, working through these transactions. The question is kind of what's in it for the banks. We're not certain at this point that the interest rate or the ability to get money out earning interest is going to be that attractive to some banks. So some banks may decide the administrative costs are too large to participate. But another point that we're all working on in various industries is whether captive finance companies are going to be eligible to make these loans. The current answer is not, but we think the regs will change very quickly to permit them to participate. So that will provide an additional source of financing. And I guess the final point is there's concern primarily in the dealership world for dealers who own maybe 10 or 12 or 20 dealerships, whether those dealerships are counted as one entity for purposes of the 500 rule, or whether they can be counted separately. The NADA, the Industry Association, is working right now with manufacturers so that manufacturers of cars, at least, and maybe other franchisors as well, can get exemptions from the accumulation rules so that each dealership or each franchise business will be considered separately for purposes of the 500 rule. And that will really open up this funding to virtually all of our dealership clients and all of our franchisee clients of various descriptions. So that's an important point.
Great, thank you. Tim, do you have anything to add?
No, that was a great summary, George. Just one point, sort of follow up on what he was saying about there's no specific, bright line requirement. They've come out with the application form now for this program, and the borrower just needs to make a couple certifications. And for example, the first one is you're certifying that current economic uncertainty makes this loan request necessary to support the ongoing operations of the applicant. Well, I think it's safe to treat that very broadly. I mean, everything is uncertain now, right? So.
Thanks. Okay, so we're going to go a little bit off the list of questions that we received pre-registration. I just received 3, and my assumption is that has something to do with this topic. So can you use CARE Act and EPSLA? Or George or Matt?
I'm sorry, Kendall, you're cut out for a moment. Could you repeat that?
Yeah, so this is a question that we just got from the people who registered. Can you use the CARE Act and EPSLA?
Tim, I'll let you respond to that if you will.
I think that's a kind of emergency loan through the SBA program. And if that's what the question is referring to, you can, if you have one of those loans currently, you can participate in the new this new Paycheck Protection Program loan in the CARES Act, and your existing emergency loan through the SBA would be rolled over into that, into this new loan that is under the CARES Act.
Okay. And then another one, can a company apply for both the emergency income disaster loan and the payroll protection program?
Oh, I'm sorry, Kendall. I was answering the question you just asked, so I may have misled the question on the previous one.
This was a second question that just came in.
Yeah.
George or Matt, do you have any comments towards that?
I have that information sitting on my desk, Kendall, and maybe I'll have it by the end of our presentation. I've certainly seen an answer to that question.
Okay. If for some reason, to those who are listening, that we don't have that specific answer, we will make sure to, in the follow-up, provide you that insight. So here's another question. If you furloughed or WFR staff, I'm not quite sure what that means, and they don't want to come back for whatever reason, can we hire new staff to replace them, being all the same to the program?
Kendall, the issue from a CARES Act standpoint is you have to maintain your headcount. So if you've got 40 employees now and 10 of them don't want to come back, you've got to figure out a way to get your headcount back up to where it was. The policy behind the statute is to get employment back to levels that it was on February 15th.
Okay, and then how are commission staff treated to the program, technician, sales staff, as the commission earnings are less as it pertains to the 75%?
That question really hasn't been addressed in any of the regulations at this point. Our assumption right now is that they have to continue on the same pay plan basis. So, they have to have the same commission basis or whatever the basis is for their compensation before. I don't think you can guarantee that commission staff will get the same commissions they got pre-February 15th.
Okay. And then another question that came in, which I think you just previously answered, what percentage of your previous payroll do you need to keep that can be forgiven by PP? I'm assuming that's, you have to make sure that your payroll is at the same level that it was before in order to get the benefit. Is that what you mentioned?
In the current statute and the guidance that's come from the Treasury Department, you have a 25% leeway. I mean, you can adjust compensation by 25% and no more. So you don't have to keep them at precisely the same level. But beyond that threshold, you've got to have your employee staff still there in the same numbers and earning about the same that they were before.
Okay, great. Great questions, guys. So, Tim, the various tax provisions provided to businesses in the CARES Act are somewhat confusing, where they need to make choices to claim different benefits.
Thanks, Kendall. Looking at the various tax provisions for businesses, I like to, in terms of the benefits in the CARES Act for business, I like to divide them between sort of the category of sort of, immediate cash flow relief to businesses. And then there's some other provisions that the relief will be a little bit more deferred. They are favorable, favorable changes in the tax law, but they won't have, it won't be an immediate cash relief. So for examples for those would be, there's a new favorable change in the net operating losses. So currently net operating losses had to be sort of carried forward, but now there's a new provision that for tax years 2018, 19, and 20, they can be carried back up to 5 years instead of carried forward. So this might provide an opportunity for taxpayers, but they may have to wait until filing their 2020 returns to benefit from that. So if they have a loss in 2020, then instead of carrying that forward, they could sort of immediately apply, file an amended return to carry back that NOL to a profitable year, and then get the benefit that way. That's one example. Another example is there's been a favorable change to the provisions regarding how much business interest you can deduct. Currently, businesses can deduct business interest expense up to 30% of EBITDA, and now you can deduct that up to 50% of EBITDA for the tax years 2019 and 2020. So that benefit taxpayers may not receive until next year. Possibly they can receive it this year by filing an amended return for 19. So those are two sort of major provisions changing the tax law that there's not the benefit will be somewhat deferred. But then there's three major provisions. We already sort of discussed two of them that have immediate cash flow relief for businesses, and those three are the Paycheck Protection Program, this new SBA program, which we've discussed. The second one is deferral of the employer portion of payroll taxes beginning from Friday. And the third provision we haven't discussed yet. It's a new provision. It's for employee retention credits. And this particular one, there is a requirement, specific requirement to have been impacted by the coronavirus pandemic. And so the requirement for this one is that sort of an either or. There's two tests that you could qualify under. And one is if there's been a partial or a full suspension of your operations due to a coronavirus-related shutdown order from the government authority, or if your gross receipts for any quarter this year declined by more than 50% when compared to the same quarter in the previous year. So those are the requirements, and if you meet one of those requirements, then a business can claim a credit for up to 50% of the wages paid to their employees. There's a limit of up to wages of $10,000 per employee, and this credit will be applied against their payroll taxes. So these are the three main provisions that provide immediate cash flow relief to businesses, but taxpayers do have to make a choice for these. As we mentioned, if a business applies for this new SBA loan program, then they will not be able to defer payment of their employer payroll taxes. Also, if they also apply for this new SBA loan program, they will not be able to obtain the employee retention credits. They will not be able to benefit from that provision. So there are choices that need to be made, but I think at this point I'd like to sort of, just confirm what George was saying about this new SBA loan program, the Paycheck Protection Program. It is, extremely favorable. It's extremely favorable provision for businesses, and if the business is if you're able to maintain your payroll, then the loan turns into a grant. So that's free money. I want to emphasize that. And unlike other sort of situations with debt, that forgiveness of the loan will not be taxable income. It'll just be a grant. So if at all possible, that would be, my first choice would be to apply for this loan through the Paycheck Protection Program. And I would advise everyone to sort of get with their, accountants, get with their advisors and their own bank as soon as possible. To get this to apply for this program.
So Matt, what do you do with an employee who insists on wearing a face mask?
Sure. That's a good question, and we've received a lot of questions like that, whether it's a face mask or just an employee who has a general concern about working given the virus. The short answer is typically you as the employer get to determine whether the employee gets to wear a mask or not. Particularly if it's a generalized fear and the employee just wants to be safe wearing a mask. You of course can let the employee wear the mask if you want to. That's up to your discretion, but if you don't want the employee to wear the mask, then that's up to your discretion as well. I think the best way to approach that is have a conversation with the employee and try and understand what's motivating the employee. Is there something about the workplace that you can improve? Is there facilities that aren't clean? Are there interactions or failures to recognize social distancing that the person's worried about? But ultimately, at the end of the day, it'll be up to you, assuming there's not some significant circumstance like this is a healthcare worker or something like that would necessitate the person to wear a face mask.
Great, Renee, do you have something to add to this?
Yes, I do want to add a point of caution here too, because that person who is asking to wear the face mask may have a different issue that needs to be covered. So to George's comment, make sure you speak with the employee to make sure they understand the underlying reasons for that, because it may have nothing to do with the current virus situation.
Thanks. Matt, under what circumstances could an employee claim workers' comp for contracting coronavirus in the performance of regularly assigned duties?
Sure. So as most of you know, workers' comp will apply if someone's injured in the line and scope of their duties. So if someone wanted to make a colorable claim that they were infected by COVID while they were working, they would need to show that they got sick while working at your place of business. And how they do that, maybe they could show someone else has been infected or a customer's been infected and I had to deal with them. But there would have to be some establishment, some causation establishment. And so that's the first part to consider. But if they are sick and they get sick from work, the authority we're seeing is that would be a workers' comp claim, or at least it could be alleged it's a workers' comp claim. And there's different parts of that. Some people are asymptomatic. Some people have short-term symptoms, maybe out of work a few days, up to 14 days. And they could claim benefits, but the workers' comp benefits would be limited. And of course, there'd be some medical expenses that would be covered under the act, but the benefit amount would not be significant. And on the flip side, there's people who end up in the hospital or worse, and in that case, the benefits could be significant. So it's something to think about, and hopefully you're keeping your workplace safe, you're following the CDC guidelines, and you're doing what you can to keep your people safe. But ultimately, workers' comp is a no-fault statute. So whether you take every precaution in the world or you take no precautions, if someone gets sick in the line and scope of their duties, and they can show that they got sick, they got the virus while working for you, and it was due to the work, then they'll be able to make a claim. Now we got an article today. It was interesting how this could affect your workers' comp benefits, the amount of money that you're paying for your coverage for workers' comp claims, and that could be impacted as well, where we're going to see how that fleshes out over the next couple weeks and months. But that's something to think about as well.
Thank you. George, this one's for you. So you may need to get closer.
Fair enough.
You're back on. So I have two questions here related to unions, and I'm going to combine them because it may be the same question. So one, is a loan forgiveness program tied to any union neutral commitments? And then the one from the field is, what's your thoughts about the union neutralization of accepting the SBA loan?
Sure. This is kind of a combination George and Matt question. The union neutral position provisions of the Act are really based only on employers who have more than 500 employees. So for the most part, these grant loans, the ones that we're so excited about where you get loan forgiveness, should not apply to any of the people who are really, the target audience for this loan program. But there is a union neutral provision that applies to, I guess what you call medium-sized employers, which are employers higher than 500. Matt, you want to add anything to that? I mean, from a labor law perspective?
No, if you're over 500, it's something important and something that definitely needs to be considered, that you would have to be neutral in the event that a union tries to organize your facility. And neutral has a lot of different interpretations under labor law. And what it means in this case is not clear. At the very least, it would mean that you're not supposed to take a position on unionization. And so you would not say, here employees, we think it's not in your best interest to be a part of the union, and here are the various reasons. It could cover, most employers have small group meetings when organizing campaigns on their facility, where they get their message out about the facts about unions and what it could entail. Those could be curtailed significantly. So it could go on, but there's a lot that can come out if you're bound to this neutrality agreement. So if you're over 500, you're pursuing these loan opportunities. That's a really important consideration and something you need to think hard about because that could have a big impact.
And kind of cutting to the chase on that question, the union neutrality rule may make it really undesirable for you to pursue one of these loans because you don't get forgiveness if you're over 500. And so all you're really getting is the benefit of cheaper interest rates and maybe some liquidity that you wouldn't otherwise have. So I think hard and fast about sort of wading into that area.
Okay. Matt, can you speak to layoffs, furloughs, the benefits, and employment options for these possibilities?
Sure. So layoffs and furloughs they're similar concepts. Generally, the way I distinguish them is furloughs is someone is not being paid. So they're off work on unpaid leave for multiple weeks. Typically, benefits continue during that time. I think these are most popular when you feel fairly certain you're going to bring people back, even if you don't know when. Under most state laws now, they'd be entitled to unemployment benefits, particularly with the recent changes states have made because of the COVID situation. Layoffs are there's temporary and there's permanent, but it's more likely that that's a termination of employment. So it could be the same concept. We hope to bring them back. We hope this is short term, but as of now, your employment's ended. You're not going to be entitled to any benefits. You'll probably have to issue a cover notice. They'll file with unemployment as if their employment has terminated, and those are primary the primary distinctions. Now, it's a bit semantics, and really what unemployment and what most laws are going to look at is what's really happening. As the employment relationship ended, or does it still exist? They're just not working during this time period. So however you want to categorize it, keep in mind that distinction. But the net effect is, under most unemployment laws, these people will still be entitled to unemployment. If you want to keep them on insurance, my recommendation is to furlough them, and you can keep paying their benefits to the extent you want to during the time until you're ready to bring them back. And of course, you're not necessarily bound to bring people back. Circumstances can change, so a furlough could transition into a permanent layoff if that's what's in your best interest.
Great, thank you. So I received a question from the field, and it's a leadership question, and I thought this could be nicely placed here. So George, Matt, and Tim could get a glass of water. So Dan and Brigitte, but I'll start with Dan. As a leader, how do you balance being visible in your organization while still performing social distancing?
I'm sorry, I forgot to unmute my microphone. That's an interesting question. And I think one of the things that happens is that we have a tendency to put some distance between ourselves and other people anyway, whether it's physical or emotional. And I think a way that you could certainly go about doing this is taking advantage of some of the video applications that you have and just send blogs out to people, do a mass blog. If you are going through an operation that's open, you can still acknowledge people and you can still maintain a social distance. And I think one of the biggest things is just smile and let people know that you're interested, and communicate with them in ways that maybe you don't typically, but if they ever needed to know that you're there, this is it.
Brigitte or Renee, do you have anything to add to that?
Yes, I definitely do. Kendall, thanks first of all for having me on. I find the term social distancing a bit misleading. It's definitely distancing physically and to keep safe. And that distancing, however we may call it, does not relieve leaders, company owners, managers from taking care of their teams. And as Dan said, doing some vlogs or blogs, I even would go a step further and say, how about you get on calls with them, on Zoom calls where everyone is visible like we are here, and without an agenda, and the agenda would be care, really relate to them that you do care. Right now, especially in this time of distancing, the term care and the caring for others needs to be more reflected in our words, because we cannot necessarily take the actions that we usually take. Acknowledgement, big point right there, Dan. I totally agree with Dan on that, to acknowledge however we can. Sometimes it is a smile. Often it is a thank you for hanging in there. These are times of uncertainty, acknowledging the times of uncertainty. Thanks for hanging in there with us, team. We're gonna get out of this. We're gonna come out of this strong. So really tapping into communication rather than the actions, the in-person actions, communicating with them on a more nurturing and caring level.
Thank you. Excuse me, I have something in my throat. Okay, so back to Matt. What if an employer wants to reduce his employees' pay by $600 federal addition to state unemployment compensation? And that would be because in some cases, people could make more while on layoff than by working, which could create a disincentive for people to really work hard at finding another job.
Yeah, it's a good question. There's not necessarily a law forbidding that. but it's probably not a good idea. I think it's probably not the right way to approach it either. If you need people working, you can put them on a partial work week or reduced work schedule to try and keep them working and meet your business needs. But I wouldn't frame your decisions in response to this new unemployment opportunities. I would staff people as needed. There is going to be an issue though, where persons in Alabama, you'd be eligible for $875 an hour if you didn't work and didn't have any income coming in, and there's going to be people who are going to make more on unemployment, and it's going to create a difficult time for employers staffing employees, particularly if you're trying to meet the requirements of these small business loans where you have to have certain head counts. But there is a part of unemployment where people are able to work and refuse to, then they may not be eligible for unemployment. We got clarification in Alabama that at the very least, the state benefits will not be available. If you tell someone it's time to come back to work and they say, I'm not ready to, or I don't want to, and they don't have a good basis for that, then they would not be eligible for the state benefit side. Now, the federal side, 600, may be a little different. So that's kind of a long-winded way that there's not going to be a great answer to this. Ultimately, you hope people will be committed to work, will want to come back to work. There is a bit of a sword in that there will be some states that say people aren't willing to work, then they're no longer eligible for benefits. If you tell employees time to come back to work and they say no, you can notify the state agency. We've offered employment back to them, they refuse, and the state agency can take the appropriate action it should. But for the purpose of the original question, I would not make any wages based on this unemployment consideration. I would think about your business needs, think about what's best for your business and how to staff that. And I think these issues about getting people back to work, they are what they are, and they're going to work themselves out. But I would not let that drive the analysis at this point.
Okay. Just another question from the field. Within the PP program, is 75% payroll and the total headcount mutually exclusive, or do they work hand in hand?
They are both requirements, Kendall. I mean, they both have to be met. So you've got to maintain your headcount and you cannot reduce your salaries.
Okay, thank you. Okay. So this is geared towards George and Tim and Renee, and anyone else who also wants to chime in on this, please let me know. On the CARES Act legislation that provides loans for small business relief, can you share more about how the PPP applies to loan forgiveness for payroll that includes pay to 2% shareholders? Also, any nuances we should be aware of with using a PEO to process payroll, either related to delaying employer payroll taxes or reimbursements for payroll taxes from employee sick leave, FLMA.
Okay, well, I'll start with the second question first. Remember that the payroll tax deferral is mutually exclusive with the PPP loan forgiveness. So each employer will have to decide which route it wants to pursue. And I think virtually every employer who's below 500 employees will prefer the PPP program just because it provides a grant of money. It's a better economic benefit than the payroll tax deduction. So those are mutually exclusive. There's really no guidance on whether you can pay employee shareholders or not. We have not seen anything that prohibits that yet. But I'm sure that the SBA and or the Treasury Department will come along very quickly with something that addresses that issue. But at this point, we really don't have any guidance on that.
Okay, another question from the field. What if we have already reduced our staff after February 15th with the PPP? Would we still be eligible for reduced loan forgiveness?
And the answer to that is yes. But by June 30th, you have to get your staff back to your February 15th levels in order to get the loan forgiveness.
Okay, so George and Tim, it appears that the SBA will loan amounts for independent contractors, but will not allow this amount to be forgiven. What is your understanding?
Tim, do you want to address that or you want us to?
Oh, yeah, thanks. I'll address that. So that is not my understanding. The PPP program does have a provision that independent contractors can apply. In other words, a sole proprietor or an independent contractor can apply for a loan through this program. And the terms of the provisions to have this loan forgiven would be the same for other businesses. That's my understanding.
Okay.
That is our understanding as well.
Okay, and another follow-up question. Employees with income over $100,000 per year seem to be excluded from the calculation, but does that exclude their payroll on forgiveness?
I'll take a stab at this first. So this question is referring to one of the provisions in the PPP loan program in terms of you can, sort of big picture, the amount of loan that you can apply for is based on your payroll costs and also other costs. It's based on payroll costs. And in sort of the average payroll cost, average monthly payroll cost in the 2019 tax year, and then multiplied by 2.5%. So that's the amount of the loan that you'll be able to apply for. And there's sort of specifics in terms of how payroll costs are defined. And you can include payroll up to compensation up to $100,000 for each employee. So you don't have to exclude. So if an employee is making more than $100,000, you don't have to exclude that employee from the payroll costs that you're counting, including, but you have to exclude the amount exceeding 100,000. If I didn't explain that well, I hope I did. Yeah.
Well, we have no follow-up questions, so I think you did. What are some of the best uses of stimulus money? Dan Schneider. You have to unmute your microphone. Dan, can you, yep.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Next time I'll remember.
I got your back.
I think as people look at what the best uses of the stimulus money for themselves and their organization is going to be is to really take a hard look at their individual circumstances. I think some of what George talked about in those cases over 500 where the union neutral provisions apply, you may not want to make use of any of the stimulus money because of the conditions that are attached to it. I think that Tim's points about, and George also mentioned, is that the best use of some of the programs for under 500 and the small business appears to be the Payroll Protection Act or the Paycheck Protection Plan, because if you do it correctly, it turns into a grant and it becomes free money. So I think the key is just decide for each organization to decide what's in its best interests and to work very closely with their trusted advisors in terms of CPAs and attorneys and decide this is what's going to, and if you have a board, talk to your board about it and decide how do we best use and take advantage of this opportunity.
Thank you, Dan.
There is no one size fits all. It's going to be very individualized.
Okay. How do we handle employees who refuse to come back to work indefinitely? I know we them, yet we have a business to run and they aren't here. It's very frustrating that they can't get away with staying home since they are scared. We're all scared and none of us want to be here, yet we have a business to run. You want to take that one?
I can answer.
Sorry.
I can start on that, and anyone else feel free to jump in. an important part of that is we have new leave laws. So if someone needs to be at home because they're sick, or they're caring for someone who's sick, or they've got child care issues because schools have been closed, 6 criteria, and you need to look at all those. If they're staying home for those reasons, that's legally protected leave, and they have that right, and they can exercise it, and we need to respect that right. If someone just wants to be at home because they're generally afraid, you know, there's good ways to approach it in terms of talking to them and trying to understand the situation. But at the end of the day, they have to be in the work if you want them in the work, and you can assist upon that. And if they refuse, you can fire them for those reasons. So, you know, it doesn't mean you fire them immediately, but that's what you have going for you, is you can insist upon it, and I do so in an understanding way. What are your concerns? We keep a clean workplace. We observe social distancing. You can have those talks, but if you need them in, you can insist that they come into work.
Thank you. Anyone else have anything to add? Okay. Brigida, moving past COVID-19 and engaging our workforce, what thoughts do you have on that?
So the re-engaging, you never should be not engaged with your workforce. So what I said, to plug in what I said earlier, in a time of uncertainty, as leaders and as business owners and as managers, it is our job to keep engaged with our team. May they be at home, may they be in the hospital, may they be at the workplace. Keep engaged with them with distance and in safety, and give as much certainty in things that you are in control of in such uncertain times. In times like these right now, often it is a very, very emotional time. And when emotions are high, intelligence is low and people do stupid things. So you keeping, as leaders, engaged with your team, engaged with your staff, engaged with the people that report to you is so necessary. One of my clients is doing weekly movie nights, and he does that via Zoom, and he shares his Netflix. He actually called Netflix, got in touch with Netflix and said, can I do that? And Netflix said, yes, you actually can. You can do like a broadcast with your team and do a movie night to have engagement, to have to create a sense of belonging, to create a sense of, yes, we do care for you, we want to be amongst you. In doing that, you know, I thought that was a great idea. Some of my clients do like a cocktail and a connection evening with their staff. If they cannot do that in person, which I don't think they should, do that via Zoom, do that via Skype. I think Zoom is a great tool to do that.
Thank you. Dan, do you have anything to add?
I think Brigida's answer is very solid, and I believe that in some circumstances, one of the things that you can do, and I'm assuming that we're talking about when people actually come back in, I think you can go through a kind of a reboarding process. And part of what you can do in that reboarding process is talk to people about your vision and your guiding principles, and remind them that the company up until this point has been successful, and that if we did it once, we can do it twice, and we can be successful again. I think to build a little bit on what Brigida talked about, the 4 things that people really want are inspiration. So part of what you can do as a leader is use your influence to really inspire people. And if you wonder how you do that, then go back and read as much or watch as much of Shakespeare as you can stand to see how he did it with Mark Antony and Henry V, and really talk to people in ways that are not only going to be influential, but inspirational, because that's what they're going to be engaged about. Is it's something bigger than them. It's something that they're going to consider now as relatively safe, and help educate them on how they can do their jobs even better now than they did before they left, and give them feedback. And remember to treat them with dignity and respect, and you'll be fine. You will have no problems if you treat people with dignity and respect. They'll be plenty engaged.
Thank you, Dan. Matt, what do I do if people want to continue working from home once the shelter in place and lockdowns are over?
The opportunity to work from home is again going to be up to you as the employer. So if you're a business that can be open and has work to perform, you can insist upon people coming to work. You know, again, there's these new paid sick leave laws, and if they need to be at home for a reason in these paid sick leave laws, then they'll have that right. But an important caveat in those laws, is that if they can telework, they may not be eligible for that leave. So if someone has child care obligations and they can't come into work, if they can telework and otherwise meet their child care obligations, then that's something you can insist upon them doing. But if an employee doesn't want to come into work just because some general fear of the virus, or they like teleworking, but you want them in the office, you're perfectly free to insist upon them returning to work.
Thank you. Renee, do you have anything to offer? To make sure your microphone's unmuted, Renee.
Thank you.
There you go.
I have a client who was very nervous about allowing their employees to go home because he thought that the productivity would fall off the cliff. But what they found in the short time that they've been away is that it works. And there are some things that they had to do to put into place to ensure the productivity, but it worked. So after this is all over, my recommendation is to take a look to see if there's a possibility that some of your people can work from home, maybe not all of the time, but on some occasion that will allow some flexibility within the workforce. People would definitely appreciate it if they're able to work from home on occasion and not be tied so much. Have to think ways toward morale as well.
Great, thank you. This next question is for you, Renee. How do I measure the productivity and make sure they are being efficient?
Well, the main thing that I feel that most people need is structure around their work in order to become successful. First thing that I would do is make sure that you set some very clear deliverables and then manage to those deliverables. There are also some technology pieces that you can add that will allow you to measure productivity, such as Trello, Telegram, Timer, Zoom, in order to be able to make sure that you can keep in touch with your people and monitor their productivity. Another piece that you can add to that is make sure that on a daily basis that your people send in a report that describes what they've been doing and progress they've been making towards those goals and those deliverables that you set up in the very beginning. The key piece being making sure that they have clear-cut goals, and then you manage and monitor towards that.
Great, thank you. Renee, how under the CARES Act will I still be able to fire underperformers, or do I have to keep them on the payroll to keep a grant status on the loan? And that could be Renee or Matt.
Well, there's nothing that will require you to keep an underperforming person on staff. If they're underperforming, then you manage them just like you would under normal circumstances. My understanding, and I guess Matt or George, you'll probably handle this piece a little bit, but keeping them on the payroll, I believe that the measurement period will decide exactly how many people you need to have on board when it's time for you to get your forgiveness. So that's measured based on the prior to this event and then the after. So Matt, George, you want to handle that piece?
No, I agree completely with what Renee said. The idea is you have to keep the same number of employees on your payroll, but you don't have to keep any particular employee on your payroll. So if somebody's underperforming, you need to fire them. You need to talk to your labor lawyer like Matt or somebody and be sure you're following all the rules. But you can certainly terminate someone, but you've got to be in a position to immediately replace them.
Great, thank you. Matt, how does OSHA impact cleanliness, sanitation of the workplace, and safety considerations of my business?
So OSHA has promulgated guidance on this issue. It's available on their website. And it talks about best practices and not so much as affirmative obligations, but recommended best courses of action. It also identifies certain employers by group, and generally, if you fall in a group, it has recommendations for how to act. Ultimately, there's a general duties clause, and that requires employers to provide a safe workplace. And the OSHA guidance is how best to provide a safe workplace. So it's long and it's a bit detailed. I won't go into every aspect of it, but I recommend you go to the website and look at it. Another critical component is the CDC guidelines. They have very good guidelines of what employers should do for best practices. But if you follow those, the CDC guidelines, and you read the OSHA guidance and determine what is feasible and what you can do, you'll be in really good shape. If you have a virus, if someone is tested as positive, there are reporting requirements under OSHA, the OSHA logs, and so that'll be something else to think about as well.
Thank you. Dan, what do we think the other side of this looks like? What can businesses do to prevent and mitigate this type of situation in the future?
I'm sure that that's a question a lot of people are trying to come up with an answer with right now. I think that the nice thing about the future is that it hasn't been written yet. So we've got an opportunity to really make the future very bright for ourselves. And part of it is to learn from this experience and not get lulled into a sense of, well, it's over. It's a once in every 500 years or so experience. And so I'm probably never going to face it again in my lifetime. I think the way to really try to reduce the likelihood that something like this happens on a global scale is to participate actively in the drafting of legislation and approaches, and to get active in your community programs to help ensure that the kinds of shortages and things that we appear to be experiencing right now are less likely to occur in the future. To say that I always get nervous when people say we're going to do everything, we're going to make sure that this never happens again, because history does tend to repeat itself. So I think the case is to just put as many plans, in addition to your strategic planning, develop a contingency plan so that if something like this does happen, you're not caught flat-footed in the future. So I think having some contingency plans and basing things on the probabilities as opposed to the possibilities is probably a lot. I just believe in playing the odds. So if the improbability is probably up there with the possibility that it could happen again. It is possible. It's not probable in our lifetime, but somebody's going to have to deal with it. So we might as well put some plans together and write our own future.
Thank you. This one's for you again. How do you, oh, sorry, Renee, did you want to speak?
Now, I'm just going to reiterate that I agree that it's important to develop a crisis plan and identify their critical stakeholders. It would have been a wonderful thing if people had people who have been looking at different trends that affect their particular area in advance so that you don't get caught flat-footed. If someone within their department and their level of responsibility have been looking at the various things that were happening, if you had a crisis team in place, they may have been looking at this to say, how will that particular event affect my business today or in the future? And prepare and get as prepared as you possibly can. It's almost like if I'd have known that this was coming, I would have gone out to the grocery store and bought up tons of toilet paper. If I would have been paying attention to some of the trends that were coming down early enough, I got stuck out there looking for toilet tissue with everyone else. So having a crisis plan, having a crisis team, and trying to see how that may affect your business and having a constant review with your people may help you get ahead of the curve just by a little bit.
Thank you. Dan, how do you get your corporate culture to recalibrate if behaviors of change long-term on the other side of this crisis?
I think the cultural issues here have the opportunity to be pretty profound, because some people are going to get lulled into this sense of good, things are back the way they always were. And there probably are things that you would have changed or would like to have changed about the way your business operated, even if there had been no coronavirus or COVID-19. So I think part of what you want to look at is, what are the guiding principles that you followed? Because most of the people on this call probably are going to be family-owned businesses or closely held businesses. Part of what you want to make sure that you do from talking to people about your culture is make sure they know what your motivation and your perspective is about why you were in business in the first place, and how their job supports and lines up with what your motivation and your purpose in creating your own business and your own destiny was to begin with. I think a second piece is that there are three things that really become part of your culture. One, again, would be the symbols, and pay attention to what you've got up around the walls or what you've got out in the parking lot that help communicate to people, this is why we do what we do. There are also some traditions that you follow, and some of those traditions in effect have become pretty sacred, and the words I've heard used is that they've become sacred cows. And sometimes you have to really examine the sacred cows and decide whether they would make the best hamburger, and begin to change some of those practices. And then the third piece is to look at the behaviors that you have been supporting. And when it comes to, I thought the question about how do we deal with underperformers is that you don't tolerate it. And there's assuming you're like most businesses, there probably is a certain amount of underperformance that you tolerate from some people just because they're nice people. And they are the if onlys. They really get what we want to do. And but they just don't have the capacity, but boy, they sure are nice. And I just can't bring myself to take any kind of action that others might consider punitive or disciplinary. So give people a little more credit, and if they can't, if they're not performing the way you want them to, then the more you tolerate that, the more it's going to be considered accepted behavior by everybody else in the organization. And they're going to be looking at things like, why can't you hold people accountable? You're playing favorites, and all of those kinds of things that are going to have a negative impact on your culture and your leadership style as perceived by other people. So the key is just be consistent, be predictable, and insist on the culture that you want. Because what I've learned over time and working with people is that if you settle for what you get, you are never going to get what you want. So don't settle for less than what you really want out of your culture.
My bad, I was muted. It said, Brigitte, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that was beautifully said. Thanks, Dan.
Okay. Renee, what can I, as the owner, personally do to ease employees' anxiety and worry?
You know, that's an interesting question. When you take a look at our national leaders, they're kind of giving you a blueprint of different ways to handle and maybe not handle the different things that are going on, the anxiety that exists in their states. And there are things that we can learn from some of that. One is to really make sure that employees really fear the unknown. So to be a good leader in these times, first thing I think you have to do is, take and provide as many facts as you possibly can and communicate openly and honestly with your people as much as you possibly can. Because when you give them information, you will reduce their stress levels. You got to remind people that they have to not assume too many things, because when people start assuming, oftentimes they assume the negative. So we want to keep people away from some of those things. Give people reasons to really look forward to the future and being productive again. This is a very, very stressful time for most of the folks. And when you have a lot of stress, especially when there's high demand and very low control. So you have to look at being able to give people more control around the things that they do. One of your big pieces is going to be just managing people's perception of the situation. Because when people feel like things are a challenge to them, they tend to exhibit much greater motivation and increased performance when they feel like the stress is generated by a challenge. When they see that it's generated by, or if they see it as an obstacle to them getting things done, then it will decrease the motivation and performance. So making sure that your objectives are very clear, keeping down conflicting requests to your people, and eliminating red tape will really help people to get back on track early.
Thank you. I have, this question is either for George, Matt, or Tim. Is there a specific definition and or a list of all the different kinds of expenses that can go onto the SBA loan and are forgivable, such as mortgage, interest, such as floor plan, insurance premiums, etc.?
Kendall, there are 4 categories: interest payments, rent payments, utilities, and payroll. And really all of those are forgivable. There's some comment, and Tim may know more about this. There's a comment in the Treasury guidance that talks about how some categories may be limited to 25% based on the interest in the program. We're not really sure how that works yet. But all of those, I mean, including things like floor plan interest, you have to be careful because it's not loan payments. It is interest only. So you cannot pay any principal at all with a portion of the loan that would be forgivable. But certainly all interest on debt is a permitted use under the statute.
Thank you.
That's a good summary. Yeah.
Okay, great. Brigitte, what thoughts do you have on communication tactics when you don't necessarily have the answers?
That's a pretty broad question, so I don't want to take that question out of context, and I don't know the context, so I'm going to answer it this way. If you do not have the answer for someone's question, you want to get to the root of where is that uncertainty coming from? Because questions are coming from an uncertainty. They want to know more information about what are they going to do with that information? There is a more underlying fear, anxiety, worry in order to ease whatever the emotion is with the information that they're getting in the answer. And if you, as the manager leader in that position, do not have the answer, give them the care and the nurturing side and say, look, I don't have the answer right now. Can I ask what, where would that answer lead you to, and where is that stemming from? And I'm certainly going to work on getting the answer for you. In the meantime, please come back with any other worry, any other, I don't want to frame it as worry, any other questions that you have, and I will work on getting the answer for you. So not just leave them hanging, go, I don't have the answer, I don't know, and shrug your shoulders, but really care for your people, especially during this time. where there's so much uncertainty and there's so much change right now. People as humans, we don't like change, but there is a lot of change. So we cannot have all of the answers, but we can certainly care for our people and say, let me work on getting an answer for you.
Thank you. Brigida, what sort of general motivational ideas do you have? For example, the person who submitted this question, they said they have sent out a video once so far, but looking for other ideas going forward. And you may have already covered this a little bit with the movie nights.
Right. So movie nights, having like a get together, having an open Q&A for your folks, you know, send in your Q&A via email and I'll do a little video and send that back out to you with any update information. The more transparent and the more that you can share that you are in control of as the leader and as the business owner with your team, with your staff, with your employees, the more somewhat relaxed. I'm not going to say they're going to completely keep them calm. Somewhat more relaxed they're going to be. If there is complete silence coming from you, then that's just going to add another level of frustration or another level of worry. So movie nights, you know, everyone get some kind of drink in your hand and let's get together for coffee in the morning via Zoom or via Skype or any other kind of video conference call that you can see everyone. Some of my clients have been doing like little cooking shows where they all cook together something. Or some of my clients are restaurant owners and they do like, here's how you do little sliders and here's how you make this special cocktail. Something fun, something where people actually want to be involved in and engaged in to pass this time of everyone being locked in. Help each other if you can in some way. There are a lot of parents out there that have their kids at home with them that are homeschooling or online schooling. There's a lot of frustration levels. So kind of ease the frustration in any way that you possibly can. Just sending out a fun video or sometimes a motivation of, hey, we're going to get through this and why don't you share with us what we're going to do together as a team, and that's part of team building as well. Once we get out of this lockdown, once we get out of this, once we see on the other side, what do you guys want to do? Do you have some ideas? And just brainstorm. People want to be heard. Give them a place to be heard. And again, Zoom conference calls with some fun ideas. And if you don't have, as a leader, if you don't have the ideas, pull your staff, pull your employees. They want to be heard. They're going to have some great ideas and take their ideas.
Great. Dan or Renee, do you have something to offer?
Yes. Just adding one more quick thing to that is create groups within your teams around different things, such as hobbies, so that people can come together and they can talk about the various hobbies. It's interesting that people go to work all of the time and they don't share that kind of personal information, even including sharing things around their kids. It could be everybody is pulling their hair out around, what do I do with this 2 or 3 year old all day long that's going stir crazy like I am. So just create groups within your organization and allow people to kind of come together.
If I could add one more piece to that, I think that a lot of what I'm hearing is we talk about these things reminds me a lot of one of my favorite quotes from Mother Teresa. And that's that most of us would like to do great things, but for the most part, we will be much better off if we do a lot of little things with great love. So the kinds of things that we're doing with people right now don't have to be huge, but they do have to implement that you're using one of, there are 20 characteristics generally that some people say are associated with leadership, authentic and reliable leadership. And 16 of those account for about 11% of how you're going to be viewed by people. The 4 that are most important, and in this order, are first of all, people need to know that you've got their back. So doing these kinds of things will send a message to them that I'm here for you, I'm going to support you, I'm going to be with you. The second deals with, they want you to be results focused. The third is that they want you to be open. And the fourth is that they want you to be decisive. So focus on those four things, and you've already gotten a strong B or a weak A in terms of your overall leadership performance. The other 16 characteristics for the most part are window dressing, and you need them, but they're not as important as those first four. So let them know you've got their back, focus on results, be open to ideas and suggestions, and be decisive. And you'll be fine.
Peter, we're gonna.
And by the way, being decisive and being a dictator are two different things. So the focus here is be decisive, don't be the dictator.
Thanks, Dan. Brigitte, how can I make sound decisions in such uncertainties?
I'm sorry, Kendall, can you say it again?
Sure. How can I make sound decisions in such uncertainties?
So we can make sound decisions on the things that we're in control of. And there's a wonderful, very easy practice, and you draw a outer circle and then you draw an inner circle. The outer circle are the things that you are, that you know, there's a greater good in the environment and everything that's going on that is not in your control. The inner circle is everything that's in your control. So start listing as a leader, or even with your team, go through that practice and start listing everything that you are in control of. And the greater the list is of the things that you are in control of, giving certainty to your team, making them heard, being decisive in what you're going to do next. Everything, you know, plugging into what Dan just said, which is absolutely spot on and beautiful. Start listing that and give ownership in exercises like that to your team. So you can make that together as a small team, or everyone does the exercise individually. That's going to, the longer the list is, the more certainty it gives a person of what they're in control of right now. Because quite frankly, we're not in control of how long is this going to take. I get this question on a daily basis. How long are we going to be in lockdown? How long is this going to take? When is an end in sight? I don't know. We don't know. Okay, so what are you going to do with that information, and what can you do right now to kind of ease your situation that you're in right now? How about we make the best of the situation that we're in right now and really focus on the things that we can control rather than focusing outward on the things that we cannot control? Because as long as we're focusing outward, we're going to go in a hamster wheel, and we're going to get more and more frustrated, and, you know, families might fall apart. Parents and kids might have a big fallout. Spouses might have a huge fallout. The divorce rate might go up, you know, drastically. Those are some worst case scenarios, but with us really keeping the main thing of what can we control right now is going to be our biggest goal for right now in the moment.
Thank you. Dan, do you have anything to offer?
No, there's nothing I could add to that. So.
Great. Dan, can you speak to capital expenditures and future investments during this time?
Yes, and I think that capital expenditures, and I think we can pick up on a point that Renee made about putting together plans. And there's a certain amount of money that you probably should be setting aside for capital expenditures anyway, as you plan to grow your business. And I think that as part of the overall strategic planning process, you want to look again at what do you want your organization looking like in 5 to 10 years from now, and allow what you want to have happen control the way you put your budget together, and then structure your performance in such a way that you meet the funding requirements you're going to have to be where you want to go. So I think that you definitely need a full budget, and that budget needs to include your projected CapExes that will take you where you want to be.
Thank you. Dan, this is for you again. Should I expect to have to rebuild some teamwork after people have been isolated from each other?
I think if you do the kinds of things that Renee and Brigitte have been talking about, and if you have done those prior to what we're experiencing right now, then the amount of work you have to do to pull people back together is going to be relatively small. If you haven't done those to start with, then you've got an excellent opportunity to say, well, up until now, we haven't really focused on teamwork, but from this point forward, we're going to. And here are the kinds of things that we're going to do. I think that another piece to look at is if it's a great time, if you're wondering about your teamwork now, your compensation systems have to be aligned with what you say you want in the way of teamwork. So if you have structured your compensation in such a way that it's at cross purposes with having what you really want to be a team, then this is an ideal time to think in terms of, do I really want the kind of teamwork I say I want, or do I really want to compensate people the way I've always compensated them, even though that may be a wedge factor in some cases. So I think you need to look at where have you been, where are you right now, and where do you want to go in terms of how much teamwork you're going to have to do. But I would expect that it probably is going to take a couple of weeks anyway, after you've pulled people back in, for those teams to begin to function at least as well as they did, or better than they did before all of this happened. They're going to, and the first several days back are not going to be particularly productive, because if you haven't kept teams together virtually, then they're going to be spending quite a bit of time talking about well, here's what happened to me, and they're going to want to be sharing their stories. I think the most important thing to remember in this is a quote from Einstein that I really enjoy and like. And his opinion was that the splitting of the atom has changed everything in life as we know it, with one exception. And that exception is human nature. And a lot is happening that's going to change the way we do things, but it's not, it may change behavior, but it's not going to change human nature. So become a student of human nature, and then you'll have an easier time relating to your teams.
Thank you.
I also have a little bit to add to that as well. And hopefully everyone understands that there's a lot of stress on people today, whether they're staying at home and they get cabin fever, staying in and around their kids and their spouse, and just not having the ability to roam around and do their normal things. And some of that stress that's being created right now is going to manifest itself in the workplace. So when they come back, they're not all of a sudden going to be back to normal. There's going to be a transition period for them in terms of reacclimating to being part of a team and being out. They're not going to fall back into that routine right away. So it's going to be important that we over communicate with our people and get them into a lot of team building activities right away, to start trying to build that team back, the team, and also to create a routine, recreate the routines that they may have had before, or create new routines so that they have that consistent structure to be around. Because as long as they have that structure, they're going to get through this a lot faster if there's structure around some things. But building that team, or making sure that you're mindful about creating team building activities, will help them get over this a lot faster.
Thank you. So we have 3 more questions. Thank you for everyone hanging on with us. This has been a really great dynamic conversation from receiving questions from the field. Brigitte, how can we motivate our employees to get to work when this is over? And how long will it take to get people efficient again? I think that's a pretty good follow-up to Renee's answer.
How long is it going to take? That is, the sooner you can start right now in creating that communication with your staff and your team, the quicker it's going to get into the new normal. It's not going to go back to its old normal. We are creating a new normal right now, and the quicker you can have a sense of belonging, a sense of open ear, a sense of team building, as Renee just said, the quicker it's going to go into the new normal. So Kendall, what was the first part of the question?
How can we motivate our employees to get back to work when this is all over?
Create excitement. Create excitement, give an open ear, create some feedback forms. You know, when we get back, what do you see we're going to do? What's going to have to go differently? As you mentioned earlier, our consumers are going to come back and probably are going to have different consuming behaviors in some ways. So start having those thought processes right now with your staff, and not wait till you get back in the office to start that conversation. The new normal starts right now. What that then is going to be in the future, we don't know. But as Dan said earlier, we are the makers of our future. So what we can have in control right now, let's start brainstorming some things, and let's start creating some excitement. And the excitement is also going to bring the team together again. If you do a great job as a leader and as a business owner to facilitate and mediate what people are saying, the more you can be in contact and in contact with a distance via Zoom or Skype, and in control of the communication, and they're not going behind your back, the more you're going to really create this holistic team. And you don't have to be afraid that there's some splinters, you know, falling off here and there, and that stuff is being said behind your back. You really want to create that excitement and that feeling of belonging.
Thank you. And Brigitte, how would you suggest engaging customers when you can't provide a service?
Oh, do little Facebook Lives, do you know, blogs or vlogs that you can send to them via email campaign. Keep them engaged. What I said earlier, one of my restaurant clients, and guys, the restaurant companies, the restaurant industry is hurting bad. And one of my clients has 6 restaurant is partners in 6 restaurants. They had to close all of them. They had to let go, I don't know, 300, 400 people. And he's afraid that he's going to never open any of his restaurants again. Now they became creative, and they're baking cakes, and they're doing like a little drive-up window. They're creating family dinners where families can go and pick up the dinners rather than eating out. He does Facebook Lives with little recipes. Here's what you can do, you know, do a little cocktail at home, or create a menu for a romantic dinner with you and your spouse since you can't go out. So it's a reoccurring giving fun ideas and staying in touch with the neighborhood, because it's clearly he's posting these in the Facebook neighborhood groups, that once we come out of this, the neighbors are going to come to that restaurant because they took great care of the neighbors with information, with keeping that name of that restaurant front and center with other, you know, free nuggets, or even, you know, oh, I'm going to pick up a cake today, or I'm going to get our family dinner from that restaurant tonight. Although we cannot eat out, we're going to get it and then eat in. So you can get very creative in how you stay in touch with them. The number one key here is stay visible. And with more visibility right now on social media, on being, you know, active in the community, being caring in the community, that's going to add to your credibility. And then once people are going to go back out again, they're most likely going to go to the restaurant that was most visible. In this case, restaurant.
Awesome. Thank you, Rita. And Dan, what percentage of my market should I expect to lose?
That's an interesting question. And I read some studies today about what's happened in the Chinese markets. And what they're finding is that there is a percentage of people, and right now the people who expected to start going back and doing things the same way they had always done them was 1% back in late January in China. And as recently as March 30th, which would have just been a couple of days ago, the percentage of people who were far more pessimistic had gone up from 1% to about 7 or 8%, I believe. So there's a certain percentage of the market that's going to stay dormant. I think the percentage that you lose is going to be directly related to the kinds of things that Brigitte was talking about in terms of your visibility and what you're doing to try to stay connected with people during that time period. So it may take a while before you recover all of your business in terms of gross volume. But I think part of it is also what percentage of your business are you losing on an annual basis to start with? And my guess is you'll lose at least that much in 2020. So you'll have to replace that. And then if you want to get additional business, you're going to have to be aggressive in the way you go after it. So I think your baseline is historically, what percentage of our business do we replace every year for whatever reason? And you'll have to do that at least in 2020 and probably into 2021. And you'll probably have to work harder to recapture some new business.
Great, thank you. Final question. I'll start with Renee. What would be the one thing that you would want to leave the attendees on this call with for final thoughts?
Communicate with your people and do it as often and as many creative kind of ways as you possibly can. Your actions today will determine what your workforce will remember when all of this is kind of gone away. And how you treat your people during this time is going to be the thing that truly will define what your culture will be moving forward.
Thank you. Dan?
Did you say Dan?
I did.
Okay. I think if the only thing that people remember that I've said today is this, and this is the first time I've said it, it's that most people's fears are born of fatigue and loneliness, and that includes yours as the leaders of your businesses. So do what you can to keep yourself energized, pay attention to what your own energy level is, and don't allow yourself to become lonely. Use some of the techniques that other people have talked about as ways of communicating with others, stay socially involved, and to quote a former president, the only thing you have to fear is fear itself. So just stay energized and stay connected, and you'll be fine. Then you can be the inspirational leader that your people want.
Thank you. Brigitte?
Have a balance of both humanity and expertise. In times of crisis, we tend to either be, overly emotional and have a whole lot of humanity, and then our logic drops, or we go into our head and we're overly logic and go into our expertise, and then our humanity drops. Create that balance and keep that harmony of both. That as leaders, that's really going to serve you well.
Thank you. George and Matt? You may have got disconnected with them. Tim?
Oh, that was all very well spoken by the prior panelists. I don't really think I have anything to add to that.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for thank you to our panelists for sharing their wealth of knowledge with us today. There are moving nuances with the CARES Act and all the different programs out there. So if you do have any further questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to George, Matt, or Tim. Their email addresses, whenever I send this out, I will send contact information for each of them, as well as Dan, Brigitte, and Renee. Again, if you have any additional questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. We're collectively here for you and want you to lean on us. We've recorded this conversation. We'll make it public in the next 48 hours. Thanks so much. Hope you guys all have a great rest of your afternoon.